Fiery clashes between police and protesters in Paris last night. Demonstrators burned cars and garbage, furious over France's widely unpopular pension overhaul. The outrage reaching a boiling point after President Emmanuel Macron resorted to special constitutional powers after he didn't have enough votes to pass a bill raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. Macron has argued the change is necessary to keep France's pension system intact. But since the start of the year, the proposals triggered nationwide protests and multiple major strikes.
Thank you so much for joining us for CBN News Watch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israel pushing deeper into Hamas territory, killing fighters and destroying weapons. At the same time, the growing pressure by Israelis on the government to find a way to get the hostages released. Is there a ceasefire agreement acceptable to both?
It's not what the overwhelming majority of Israelis want. It's incompatible with the goals of this government. Indeed, I don't think any government, no matter who was the head of it, whether it was Benjamin Netanyahu or some possible replacement among the opposition, and that's not happening anytime soon, would ever agree to allow Hamas to emerge from this war as the victors. Now, it's true that there is pressure on the government to somehow do something to save the remaining hostages. We all understand this. I mean, it's a democracy. People speak up. There's tremendous sympathy for the hostages, and Netanyahu is personally unpopular. Bears some responsibility for the outbreak of the war because Israel was unprepared. But we should not mistake the pressure that is being put on him, which is, not dissimilar to things we've seen in other countries, even here in the United States. Remember the pressure that was put on President Ronald Reagan to ransom hostages from the Iranians. If we can go back that far in history, he will not agree to a solution that will allow Hamas to emerge unscathed from this. And if they are still standing in control of any part of Gaza, they will be the victors of this war. They will have been rewarded for the crimes of October 7th. And that is something that neither Netanyahu nor really the overwhelming majority of Israelis will possibly countenance.
Welcome to the 700 Club. The threat of an all-out war in the Middle East is intensifying. Iranian-backed forces have launched a wave of attacks against U.S. and Israeli targets in the region.
The White House accuses Tehran of provoking the crisis and prompting an American military response. George Thomas has more.
The Islamic mullahs in Tehran have dubbed it their axis of resistance.
What the supreme leader there calls his ring of fire around Israel is to build up these terror groups, these proxies for Iran, to do the fighting for Iran so that Iran doesn't have anybody come knocking on its doorstep.
Since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, Iranian proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen have dramatically upped their strikes against Israel and U.S. interests in the region.
Iran didn't arm and equip and train and finance the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Shia militia groups in Iraq to use these resources for their own benefit at their own discretion. Iran did all that so it would have a capability through its proxies to act as it's acting now.
The U.S. responding with attacks on the proxy militias.
We have taken military action against sites in Iraq and Syria that are also tied to the IRGC, which supports these militias. We have said quite clearly that we hold Iran responsible for the groups, the proxies that it supports and that it provides weapons to.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard forces in just the past week have also launched direct attacks on 3 of their close neighbors, Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan. These multiple flashpoints now causing concern of a much broader conflict pitting Iran and its allies against Israel and the United States.
A huge volcano in southwest Iceland has erupted after weeks of intense activity. Iceland's Prime Minister has declared a state of emergency.
Authorities had already evacuated 4,000 people from the area. They'd also closed the nearby Blue Lagoon geothermal spa, which is one of Iceland's most popular tourist attractions.
Right? The challenges that the supply chains are going to face are going to come on different shapes, on different moments, on different locations, and the key is how can we prepare to react to those things. So my suggestion for the people in this profession is to make sure there are three things that I think are critical. One is that despite of the challenges of the short term, they also need to keep an eye on the long term. Right? Because 2023 is going to pass and the next years are going to come and new challenges are going to be waiting for us.
An unprecedented food crisis is engulfing the world, supercharged by the war in Ukraine. It's brought rising food prices, malnutrition, and the potential for much, much worse.
It threatens to tip tens of millions of people over the edge into mass hunger and famine.
Until recently, global hunger was in decline, but since 2014, it's been rising. Over the past 2 years, the number of people without regular access to food has more than doubled. Some 800 million people already go to bed hungry every night. And now, the world's food system has been hit with a perfect storm.
2022 was already looking like a terrible year for global hunger, as COVID still continued to grip some parts of the food supply chain worldwide. You had a series of bad harvests in recent years because of climate change. This all disrupted food production.
Those two shocks, climate change and the pandemic, have meant that, according to one estimate, global supply of wheat, one of the world's most important carbohydrates, has fallen for the first time in 4 years.
And then the war happened.
Ukraine's food exports all but stopped, trapping around 25 million tons of corn and wheat inside the country, equivalent to the annual consumption of all of the world's least developed economies.
Ukraine's food exports are hugely important to the global food supply. It's a big powerhouse in terms of grain production. It's one of the world breadbaskets.
And with that breadbasket off the market, prices rocketed.
Imagine if you were buying your food from Ukraine, and now, let's say you need to go to Canada, or Australia, or Argentina. That means that you will have to pay more because of extra freight, and you will have to pay more in time because it will take you longer, and you will pass these costs to the consumer.
And other shocks have made the crisis worse.
We are in uncharted territory because not only do we have a food crisis with multiple causes, but also this is coming on top of an energy crisis and also a fertilizer crisis.
Farms run on fuel and fertilizer. As prices of both have risen, farmers' profit margins have been squeezed. And if they're forced to cut back on fertilizer because it's too expensive or unavailable, their yields will fall even more, at the worst possible time.
That will impact the production of major commodities for the next year.
Soon you will be able to pay for groceries at every Whole Foods in the U.S. with just a swipe of your hand. Amazon says that the Pay by Palm technology will be at all of those stores nationwide by the end of the year. Customers just have to hover their hand over the device to pay. This method is already being used at 200 Whole Foods locations across 20 states, and you can also find it in other places, stores like Panera Bread.
Listen to this. Instead of carrying your wallet in your back pocket or your purse, a tech company wants you to keep it under your skin.
All right, so let's explain here. Wallet More is selling microchips implanted in your hand as an alternate payment. Could this be the future? Maybe. Once you set up your card info in the company's app, look at this, it says payments could be as easy as swiping your hand over a card reader.